Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. I think people, oh yes, I think Sharif is in chat.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Oh, there you go. Okay, that's fine.
How are you today? Good.
We're just going to just give it a minute, another minute, and then inshallah we can make a start. But Assalamu alaikum, everyone. It's good to see everyone here. For those who were last week, the recordings are out on YouTube. So I hope you did watch them. For those who are new, and it's your first session, this is the second session of the series. And I'm happy that you're here. May Allah bless you, and may Allah bless all of you who have attended today. Inshallah, it's going to be an interesting talk, kind of focusing on cosmological arguments and kind of that side of the whole kind of arguments against atheistic beliefs. Quick recap from last week. Last week we talked about the rising tide in atheism, just generally speaking, the definitions, the basic things, and touching on epistemology as well, question and answer as well. Again, we've got a question and answer after the talk, so if you've got any questions, just put them in the chat box and we'll answer them in the Q&A, or when the Q&A does come, you can put your questions in. So make sure you're paying attention, so you've got your questions ready to go. Inshallah, I think we can start now. So we'll start if you want to.
I don't know if my the PowerPoint presentation, I don't know if you guys received it. It doesn't matter if you haven't.
Yeah, we've got the PowerPoint.
Oh right, yeah. If you can share it, if that'd be cool.
No worries.
Do you want me to share it? Do you want to?
You can.
It might be easy for you guys, to share, because I have problems when I share stuff.
Let's name. Do you want to do it, or do you want me to do it?
I've not downloaded the PowerPoint. Have you downloaded the PowerPoint?
I can get it. Yeah. Just for those who might have forgot what happened last week, inshallah, could you give us a quick 2-minute rundown of what we kind of the key things that we talked about last week? I know we went into a lot of depth, just quick key things just to trigger everyone's head, and then on to the next topic, inshallah.
So I think last week we talked about some of the logical implications within an atheistic materialistic worldview. And what we said is that there are a number of logical absurdities that result in atheism, particularly from a materialistic point of view. We talked about how atheism cannot ground what it means to be a human being. So, we say a human being is made of material. Atheism cannot explain how that material came about. Atheism cannot explain, life from lifelessness. But yet human beings are alive. Atheism cannot give a system to satisfy the sanctification instinct, this desire, this instinct within human beings to worship. And we gave some evidences and studies regards to showing how that exists. We said also atheism cannot account for the mind either. And we talked about how we are conscious people, we have a will, atheism cannot ground rationality, it cannot ground free will, and a few things regards to that. So in essence, what we're trying to say is that, sometimes atheists, they come and they start to present atheism as being logically correct and also innate, meaning that human beings are born atheists. And what we demonstrated last week is that atheism cannot actually ground any of the statements that they make, and in fact, in some of the cases, contradict themselves. So that was last week, inshallah. So this week, inshallah, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, amma ba'd. So this week, inshallah, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah to all the brothers and sisters who are listening. we're going to talk about the specific aspect with regards to the proof for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, I've got a presentation here. Presentation was actually done a number of years ago. It was like a Aqidah workshop, or in fact, it was like a Dawah session. So some of the slides I'm not going to go through. I'm just going to whiz past them. I thought, it's good to have some sort of presentation on, just makes it look a little bit more interesting. But maybe it's the case that some of this stuff might not necessarily be appropriate. And I might go off topic in terms of, or away from some of the slides anyway. So I don't know if I can move the thing, or is it somebody else has to move it for me? So yeah, we could keep going. So we'll keep going as well still. Yeah. So yeah, we'll leave it at that one. Okay, so we need to understand that where does this question about does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exist or not? And really there are two big questions that as all human beings, whether we're considered Muslim or non-Muslim, we need to ask this question in order to understand our viewpoint on life. So yeah, maybe a non-Muslim or an atheist might turn around and say, what was there before life? And he says there was just material, or there's nothing. What will occur after this life? You may say there's nothing that will occur after this life. Matter will continue. And so, in essence, what their viewpoint on life is that this is the only life to live. And if this is the only life to live, then it's about maximizing as much as possible our benefit within life. It's about maximizing the individual freedom. So these two big questions, what comes before life and what occurs after life, has an impact on how we view life itself. So as an example, from a Muslim point of view, we'd say what comes before life? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being eternal created life, created us. And what will occur after this life? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us in the Quran and through the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that after this life there is a day of judgment, there is a test in terms of how we satisfied our need to perform actions, how we ate, how we drank, how we interacted with one another. All of these things we will look at, we will be held accountable for, to see whether we did it in accordance with what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or did it in accordance with what displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore liable to punishment as a result of that. So as a result, because we've answered this question, what comes before life? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. What will occur after this life? There is a day of judgment. Then we have a unique viewpoint on life. And that unique viewpoint is that our morality is firmly founded and grounded upon that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala desires for us as human beings to perform. And therefore, we will look at things from this type of paradigm, this type of framework, which is this action something that pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is this an action that something that displeases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Is this something that is permissible by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or is this something that is prohibited by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So this becomes our paradigm, our framework to view things. And it doesn't therefore just impact me as an individual, but it's now going to impact upon how I view life, society, and things around me. So it's a massive question. And this question everybody has to answer. Because if we don't answer this question, then in essence what we do is we're just following those, the people around us, what they're upon, what society has told us, how to live our life. So in order to be principled, we need to go back to this question. And so the first question is what comes before this life? And from, if we're not going to hold any, we come from without holding any presuppositions about what particular religious belief system we hold, when we're going to look at, does a creator exist or not? Is there something that caused us to come into a being, which had a will and agency, or, was it the case that we just popped into nothing by nothing and for no reason? Yeah. So this is what we're going to try and answer today. So I don't know if I can move on. Okay, cool. So that's the first thing. The second aspect with regards to this is that actually, don't worry about some of the points that I mentioned here on this, just some examples. But this issue, this question about proof for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is something which is grounded within the Quran itself. This is not something which is, some philosophical discussion and, academics have, but rather understanding the evidences and signs for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is grounded within the Quran. As the quote that's mentioned here in Surah Tur verse 35, and also the other verse 36, it mentions, أَمْ خُلُقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ, or were they created without there being anything, or are they themselves the creator? And then it first goes on to say, or did they create the heavens and the earth? بَلَا يُقِنُونَ, nay, they have no certainty. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's questioning those people who reject the belief in a creator and say, okay, if you reject this, then where is it that creation came from? Did it come without anything causing it? Were you the ones that self-created? Yeah. Did the universe self-create itself? Did you create the heavens and the earth? Yeah. You don't have any firm foundation for any of these particular positions. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is providing an intellectual argument in terms of understanding, the absurdity under atheism. If we go to the next slide. Yeah. So just as another thing as well, because I wanted to mention, there's many other ayat of Quran as well. So one of the other ayat of Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, has mentioned about the importance of using the mind is in Surah Ali Imran, verse 190, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna fi khalqi samawati wal ard. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, waqtilafi layli wan nahar, and the alternations between night and day, that these are signs for whom? Ulul albab, people of thinking. Yeah, and the word albab comes from the word lub, and lub actually means to go to something. It means the very inner part of the fruit linguistically. And what it means is that these are people who are deep. They think about things in a deep way. What are we meant to think about in a deep way? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said at the beginning of the ayah, in the creation of the heavens and the earth. Yeah, in the alternations of night and day, i.e. in things that change. That if you think about this in a deep way, you will come to the conclusion about the signs for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, so, this is something, like I said, is grounded within the Quran. In another verse, which maybe in one of the slides as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ. Yeah, in Surah Muhammad, it says, and know that there is none worthy of worship except Allah. The word here for know or having knowledge is a word which comes from the word ilm, yeah, having knowledge, yeah. But ilm, classically in the Arabic language, means having knowledge with certainty, yeah. So it's about the command here is to have knowledge with certainty that there is none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. And one of the famous scholars of the Quran, Imam Juwayni, rahimahullah, he mentioned in his book Al-Irshad, yeah, which was a book on belief. He quoted this verse of Quran, and he explained that this verse of Quran establishes that the first obligation placed upon all Muslims once they reach the age of maturity is to establish belief in Islam for themselves. Yeah, so it's, so he was saying that this verse commands the obligation to have that certainty, and the only way to have that certainty is to come to it and arrive through it through some sort of reasoned or rational process in order to gain that conviction. So this is why I said how to approach this discussion in this particular slide. And then obviously what the Quran is saying is the Quran is calling us to have conviction. Conviction is not something which is seen as being part of what the emotions are able to give us. I think last week, if I remember correctly, I gave the example of that Imam Ghazali gave, which was the example of the horse and the jockey. Yeah. Normally, by the way, when I normally give these types of talks, I like a lot of interaction. I know maybe it's not, we can do that on Zoom, but normally when I have these types of talks and discussions, I normally try and make it more of a workshop style. So I would normally ask you guys questions. What was the example of the jockey and the horse, if you remember it? And then you'd maybe respond back to me so I could know that you'd listened carefully what we were discussing last week. But to just go over quickly the example, Imam Ghazali said the emotions are like the horse, and the mind is like the jockey that rides the horse. Yeah. And he said, if you just have the emotions or the horse, it will go in all different directions. And if you just have the jockey, yeah, he will take ages to finish the course. So he said the best situation to have is to have the jockey riding a horse, meaning having thought-driven emotions. So you have these emotions, these desires to work out the question, who to worship, yeah? This need to worship, but it's the mind that then directs us to the correct conception of who deserves to be worshipped, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I also mentioned here about, so therefore we can say emotions on its own are not sufficient in order to justify our particular belief. We need to have some sort of rational process. And when we talk about rational process, generally people think about two types of processes of thinking. One's obviously called scientific thought or empiricism, or the other one is rationalism. Yeah, I don't want to go into too much detail into this discussion. It might be covered in some of the other workshops in the future, next week, by the other brothers who are going to give them. So if we go to the next slide really quickly. So I've just mentioned here, emotional approach is inappropriate because it's liable to change. Our emotions can change, so our belief is not necessarily going to be firmly grounded. It's subjective, meaning that, you know, I come across Christians who will argue Christianity is true because they feel that they have an emotional, subjective feeling that it's true. And I try to explain to them that, well, Muslims will claim that, Hindus will claim that, you know, spiritualists will claim that. So it doesn't necessarily demarcate who's right or who's wrong. Yeah, we know human beings have this desire to want to worship, have this emotion, this drive within them, but you can't just allow the drive itself or the emotions itself to be the guide because it's subjective. And the final point I mentioned about emotions being inappropriate as a basis is that would we leave very important questions to emotions and how we feel? So for example, if you had an exam and you were doing a really difficult maths test and there's really complicated equations, would you just simply close your eyes and think, you know, what's in my heart, that's what I'm going to answer? And can you imagine your teacher when the examiner or the teacher brings back your results and said, how the heck did you get this particular, you know, conclusion or this particular result? And you turn around and you say to your teacher, well, I felt it in my heart. Yeah, they'll laugh at you. In fact, they'll fail you as a result. So important questions, we don't leave to emotions alone, yeah? Rather, we try to establish some sort of objective, rational foundation. Let's go to the next slide. So I've quoted this verse of Quran, which is in Surah Muhammad, verse 19, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and know that there is none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the first part of the ayah of the Quran. And this is what Imam Juwayni, he mentioned in regards to this. So if we go to the next one. So scientific approach, I'm going to go over this relatively quickly. So science, you know, there's this term called scientism, which is this idea that all questions can be answered by science. And if you can't answer a question by science, then it doesn't exist. Yeah. So science, for us as Muslims, you know, and as rational human beings, we understand science is useful. And it's useful in determining certain things, but science is also limited to the conclusions on things within its field, yeah? So I want you to imagine now, I want you to imagine the picture Mona Lisa, yeah? Again, this would be really great if I was able to ask you these questions directly, see what your responses are. But I want you to think about the painting, the Mona Lisa. Now I want you to think about, from a purely scientific point of view, what could you tell me about that picture of the Mona Lisa? Yeah. So I just want you to think about that. Yeah. So you'd probably say, okay, well, I could do tests. I could test the material of the painting. Yeah. And I could test what type of, you know, canvas was used. I could probably test the components of the you know, the paint, what the ingredients were used to the paint. I could probably even talk about the reflection of light from the canvas to produce the various colors that I'm perceiving. And I could talk about, you know, the specific wave level, specific energy of light that's being reflected. by this canvas and by the paint. So science will tell me all of these things, and that's really good, and that's great. But would science now be able to determine that there was a person from, I think, the 15th century called Leonardo da Vinci who painted the Mona Lisa? Yeah. So is that within the scope of science? Because people say, if I cannot observe it, test it, or use it for predictions, then it's, it's just like an imagination. But if somebody turned around and said, well, you can't observe, test, or predict Leonardo da Vinci, does it mean that therefore there was no painter for the Mona Lisa? Obviously, we would not say there is no painter for the Mona Lisa, except that for a painting to exist, there must have been a painter. Yeah. So therefore, we understand that science is great at telling me about the materials, the compositions of the painting, but it's not going to tell me about the fact that there was a painter. Same thing in regards to a book. Science will tell me what the physical components are made up of this particular book, but science won't tell me that there was an author of that particular book. If I've not seen the particular author of the book, it's science that's going to be useful to this. Now, famous Imam Ghazali, he mentions this point in Al-Mustasfa, which is his book on Usul al-Fiqh, where he discusses about empiricists of his time, people who believed in this scientism of his time. And he explains that science is useful in determining what we can experience, yeah. But also there are other methods of thinking. So he gives examples of a person who's never been to Baghdad, but he knows Baghdad exists because there's testimonial evidence for this. Similarly, he gives the example of 2,000 plus 2,000 equals 4,000. Yeah, he says this is a synthetic proposition. Yeah, in logic, it's not something you need to physically witness in order to come to that particular conclusion. So he explains that there are different methods to ascertaining the truth. Science is one of those methods. And so if we go on to the next slide really quickly, we talk about the rational method. And some of the scholars, they break down the rational method. They say there's three types of thinking process. One is empiricism. That's through experience, what we see, what we sense. That's where science comes from. The second one is through testimonial evidence. What numerous people tell us about an event we have not ourselves witnessed, but they themselves have witnessed. And thirdly is things called analytic or synthetic propositions, which is to do with logic. Like, for example, all bachelors are unmarried. Yeah, the very definition of the word bachelor means that they must be unmarried. Or similarly, if we say the internal angles of a triangle, on a flat surface, what does it add up to? If you add up the internal angles of a triangle on a flat surface, what does it add up to? 180 degrees. Yeah. So that's called a synthetic proposition. So a certain reality, certain things that we can come to in our mind, which doesn't necessarily need experience. And so they broke down rational method. And I'm not going to go into too much detail, but in essence, they said you need to have a reality to sense something. You need your senses to be able to sense that reality. You need a brain, that physical component in your head. And also you need previous information, previous knowledge in order to interpret that particular reality. So I don't want to go into too much detail. Maybe in the Q&As we can go into that a bit more. So we go quickly to the next slide. Right, so what is the rational? So we said, okay, we don't need to experience something to come to a conclusion. Yeah, like for example, the painting example, we came to the conclusion that there was a painter just by observing the painting. That's not from a scientific point of view, but it is a rational conclusion. So when we sense, so let me just go back onto this painting example. If I was to ask you the question, why is it that we conclude that there is a painter for the painting? What is it that's making us come to that conclusion? Yeah. Now, some of you will say it's because we've experienced paintings before, and because we've experienced paintings before being painted, that's why we are seeing this particular, we see a particular painting like the Mona Lisa, and we can say, therefore, it must have a painter. So it's from experience. People may say that. But let's say a person, or let's not just say a person, but in fact, all people have never experienced in this currently in this generation of humanity, have never experienced the Mona Lisa being painted. Yeah, we've never seen that. Yeah, we are inferring that actually the painting itself may resemble other types of paintings that we might have experienced, but that particular painting we haven't experienced, yeah, being painted. But we can still come to the rational conclusion. So what is it about that particular painting that we can say? Some people may say, well, it's designed, isn't it? Yeah, so we can say, yeah, okay, it's designed, but how do you know it's a particular design? Yeah, so I really wish I could ask you guys questions on this. It would be more interesting that way. But anyway, what can we say about the painting? Yeah, why is it that makes us grasp the fact that it has a painter? Fundamentally, it's this. It's because the painting itself is limited, yeah? And the paint itself doesn't determine the particular picture of the painting. So if I knew everything about the physical aspect of the painting, the canvas, the paint, the reflection of light, the specific wavelength of the reflection of light, all of these things about the painting, does it necessitate that the Mona Lisa will be a picture of a woman? It doesn't, does it? If I've just got paint, red, green, and blue, yeah, or is it red, yellow, and blue, I think is the prime colors. Yeah, maybe I've got that wrong. But if I've got the colors, the physical colors, does it necessitate that it's going to be a particular painting if I've got the prime colors? No, it doesn't. Yeah, because the painting of the Mona Lisa could have been any painting. I could have taken those paint, I could have taken that canvas, and I could have produced a picture of a man as opposed to a woman, or a house as opposed to a human being, or an animal as opposed to a human being. I could have painted literally, it could have been painted in literally a number of different possible ways. Yeah, because the painting itself, the physical aspect of the painting itself, doesn't determine what type of painting it's going to be, then you need something more than the physical material to give me that, to determine the paint to be a particular type of painting. So let me give you another example. Imagine if I go into a forest and I see wooden tables, or a wooden table, let's say, or a wooden chair. Yeah, make it a little bit more complicated. A wooden chair. And I walked into this forest and I came to this and I looked at that. I would automatically conclude in my mind, rationally, somebody must have created it. Why do I do that? Because it's the same thing in regards to the painting example. Because the wooden chair, its material component is wood. But having wood does not necessitate that it's going to be a chair, because it could have been a tree, or it could have been a table, or it could have been a wooden bowl, or it could have been a wooden spoon. That wood in itself had multiple options to be different things. And the fact that the physical component of it doesn't necessitate that it's going to be a particular form, like a chair in this example. So I need some extra component, another agent, yeah, in order to fashion the wood to produce the wooden chair or the wooden table, yeah? So, and one further example, and hopefully this will make it even more clearer, is if I had a red triangle, yeah? Now, we would say that for a triangle to be a triangle, it has to have three sides, yeah? So that's necessary, yeah, to have three sides. So by definition, if I've got three-sided shape that's connected, yeah, by straight lines, by necessity, we call it a triangle, yeah? So it explains itself, yeah? I don't need any further explanation outside of the shape of a triangle to explain itself. But the fact that it's red as opposed to blue or as opposed to green, then that means that the color is not necessary in its definition, yeah? It could have been any different color. So I need something more than just a three-sided shape to explain as to why it's this particular color as opposed to any other particular color, because it has a limitation, it's limited. Or What we also say is that it's contingent or possible. It's a possibility. Yeah. Sometimes people might use the word possible beings. Yeah. So it's a possible being. And therefore, if I can recognize that something is a possibility, but it's this possibility as opposed to any other possibility, then I need an explanation as to who determined it to be this way as opposed to any other way. And that means by identifying something that's limited in one aspect or contingent or possible in one way as opposed to another way, then I'm identifying that it is dependent by necessity, that it requires something other than its own existence to explain why it exists in the way it does. Yeah. Hope that's very clear. Again, we'll open it up to Q&As at the end, inshallah. So what does this lead to? So it means that everything that we sense is limited. It's these possibilities. So yes, we talked about chair and table and paintings and books, and we say, yeah, but human beings make these things. But everything that we sense is limited. So for example, the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius, but it could be, there's nothing necessitating it to be 100 degrees Celsius. It could have been 110, or it could have been 90 degrees. In fact, if you boil water and you're on the Himalaya mountains, the water boil at 70 degrees Celsius, yeah? So it's affected by atmospheric pressure as well. But it's nothing necessary, yeah? It's not explained by its own existence. It rather has a number of possibilities, and it requires something other than itself to explain why it exists in the way it exists, yeah? So it's dependent. And also we know that things that exist within the universe, which are limited, don't just simply exist eternally, they also begin to exist, yeah? So this is really important. So things that we sense are limited, i.e. they have possible attributes that could have been another way. And if it could have been another way, it needs an explanation as to why it was that way as opposed to any other way. And secondly, that those things that are limited also began to exist, and they didn't have to exist. So they need an explanation as to why it exists as opposed to not existing. So both conclusions or both observations or sensations of the reality of the universe around us, of the alternations of the night and the day, of the creation of the heavens and the earth, we conclude that things are requiring another explanation in order to explain its own existence. Yeah. If we go to the next slide. Okay. So this is where we've got the possible explanations for limited, finite, contingent, possible beings, as they call them. Yeah. So these are the possible explanations. So we say, okay, water exists because it's limited, because it exists because of the atmosphere produced water, and that exists because of the earth, and the earth is limited and it exists because of something else like the sun and the solar system and the ability for gravity to bring it together, and the sun exists because of fusion of hydrogen, and this exists because these were created in nebulas that came together through gravitational force, and these nebulas exist because supernovas exploded. So you have these chain of events that took place. Now, can each of the chain of events, which are limited things, can each limited thing provide an explanation for the other limited thing to provide another explanation for another limited thing, going back infinitely, what we term an infinite regress? Yeah. So could the universe regress back forever in an infinite chain of limited things depending upon each other? Yeah. So that's one possibility. The second possibility is that there is an eternal cycle of events. Yeah, for example, a big bang to a big crunch. So what do I mean by this? A big bang is the universe explodes out and gets to a certain point, and then it comes back together. So this is an eternal cycle, like a water cycle. When we talk about the water cycle, we say the rain produces water, the water evaporates to produce clouds, and clouds produce rain, and there's this continuous cycle called the water cycle. So could the universe, all of these possible things that exist that require another thing to exist in order to explain its existence, could we just have a water cycle or an eternal cycle of events to explain it. The third possibility is, could this possibility of the universe itself and things within the universe which are possible, could they have just come from absolute nothing? And the final one is, the universe and all limited dependent things necessarily require an unlimited independent creator. So these are the four general possibilities to try to explain why limited things, which require other things to explain its own existence, why these things exist in the first place. Either it's an infinite chain of limited things, or an eternal cycle of limited things, or just something coming from nothing, or the fact that there is an independent, unlimited creator, which obviously we understand as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. Again, I would ask the question to you guys, if you understood the point. I would be able to see your feedback, whether you are understanding this or not. Hopefully, inshallah, you are. And if not, we can discuss it more in the Q&As. So let's go to the next one. So could we have this infinite regress? Yeah. So could we have something which is limited, explained by something else? So let's go back to the wooden chair. The wooden chair is explained by the tree. The tree is explained by sunlight, because sunlight produces photosynthesis. Sunlight is dependent upon the sun. The sun is dependent upon nebulas. Nebulas are dependent upon supernovas. Supernovas are dependent upon, stars that have other stars that existed. They're dependent upon the Big Bang. The Big Bang is dependent upon quantum singularity. The quantum singularity is dependent upon membrane structures. Membrane structures are dependent upon superstring. Superstring are dependent upon supercustard theory. Okay, I'm making it up now. There's a chain of events. Yeah. Normally you'd laugh at that joke. I know it's a bit of a dad joke, as they say, isn't it? But there's a chain of events that infinitely regresses back, and so you don't need a beginning. Everything depends upon something else. Forever. Yeah. Now we would say that an infinite regress, whether in a hierarchical causal series, which don't worry about the term, but whether it's to do with every moment, or whether it's to do with the temporal causal series, which is what I went through. This is a temporal causal series. The chair, depending upon tree, depending upon sunlight, depending upon nebulas, supernovas, stars, big bangs, quantum singularity, etc. That temporal. Both of these things are impossible, are logically impossible and logically absurd. An infinite regress is logically absurd. They're logically absurd for a number of reasons. I'm just going to go through one of those reasons. And the key, or one key argument that people use, is like the domino example, which that's why I've got a series of dominoes as a picture there. If an infinite amount of dominoes had to fall before reaching here, they would never reach here. Yeah. So let me maybe explain it. If there was an infinite series of events prior to you having the chair that's made out of wood, to get to the moment that the wood exists in order for you to make it into a chair, you need to traverse an infinite number of events, which basically means an endless series of events would have to end. Yeah, an endless series of events would have to end. Obviously, it's endless. So endless, by definition, will never end. And to get to that moment, you need to have had those endless series of events. Like, for example, if you have a last domino, for the last domino to fall over, it has to be hit by the domino before it. So this domino is not going to fall until it's hit by the domino before it. That domino is not going to fall until it's hit by the domino before that, and so on. If there's no beginning domino, would any of the dominoes fall over? No. So therefore, it demonstrates that an infinite regress is an impossibility. So that's just one argument against an infinite regress. There are other arguments, but I won't go into too many of those points. We'll carry on. So we go to the next one. So that disproves an infinite regress. The second possibility is this idea of an eternal cycle. So I give the example here of the water cycle, which is what some people try to give. They say, well, could the universe just not perpetually exist in some cycle of events? Yeah. So here we give the example. You have water falls as rain, rain, it turns into, so water then evaporates into clouds, of clouds then produce rain. And so you have this eternal cycle. The problem with the eternal cycle is actually the problem of an infinite regress. So it falls into that. And because we've negated an infinite regress, we can also negate an eternal cycle. But even if we just take this eternal cycle example, if you look at the little diagram, and instead of going forwards, let's just go backwards. So we say, okay, you've got rain. For the rain to exist, what do you need? You need clouds. So there's no rain until clouds are produced. Yeah. And then we say, okay, so we don't have, let's say, what does clouds depend upon? Well, clouds depend upon water evaporating. If there's no water that evaporates, then there would be no clouds. And if there's no clouds, then there would be no rain. Yeah, so now let's say, okay, what does water depend upon? Well, if we go backwards again, water requires there to be rain. But we just said there's no rain because there's no clouds, and there's no clouds because there's no water, and there's no water because it's not rained, because the rain is still waiting for the clouds and the clouds are still waiting for the water. So we go back in the cycle. Yeah, and when we go backwards in the cycle, we realize that nothing exists. There needs to be an initiation for any cycle to exist. It's like the old example that people give: what came first, the chicken or the egg? You remember this? This common little saying that people say: what came first, the chicken or the egg? Because the chicken depends upon the egg. But if there's no chicken, there would be no egg. But then the egg depends upon the chicken, so nothing would exist. Neither the chicken nor the egg would exist. So in the same way, if we talk about even this idea of a cycle of big bangs and big crunches, so the universe explodes out as a big bang, but before the big bang, you needed a big crunch, but before the big crunch existed, you needed a big bang. Then it's like the chicken or the egg example, isn't it? Neither both the big bang nor the big crunch would exist until something initiated it from the outside. So eternal cycle is an impossibility. So we've already gone through two out of those four possibilities and demonstrated them to be wrong. Should we go to the next one? So the next one is possibility number 3, something from nothing, or this is like the magic hypothesis. It's ironic that you get atheists that will accuse theists, that people believe in God, that they believe in something supernatural, and that they affirm that something can come from nothing. Yeah. And as I mentioned here, the belief that there was nothing and nothing happened to nothing, and then nothing magically exploded for no reason, creating everything, and then a bunch of everything magically rearranged itself for no reason whatsoever into self-replicating bits, which then turned into dinosaurs and then turned into us. Makes perfect sense. Yeah. In fact, it's an absurd position. Even those atheists who claim that the universe can come from nothing, like, for example, Professor Lawrence Krauss, Dr. Lawrence Krauss, I should say, he mentioned, and he wrote a book called Universe from Nothing. He doesn't refer to actually nothing. Another professor of physics, Professor Michio Kaku, he mentions this point that when it says the universe comes from nothing, he says in physics there's 2 types of nothing. There's a first type of nothing, which is no space, no time, no matter, no equations, absolute nothing. And then there's a second type of nothing, which is the absence of matter. Yeah, so you have a vacuum. So you still have space, you still have time, you still have the laws of quantum mechanics, you still have those of physics. This type of reality still exists. And he says, so he goes on to mention, he goes, if we're talking about the first type of nothing, then yeah, obviously nothing will come from it. But in physics, when they talk about nothing, they're not talking about the first type of nothing, i.e. absolute nothing. They're talking about some type of nothing, something that actually exists as a prior state. Yeah, and that this thing itself produced other things. So they're not really talking about nothing. So what's the conclusion to this? So what did we say? We said the first possibility is an infinite regress. We said, well, that's an impossibility. And we demonstrated that through the dominoes examples. The second one we said was an eternal cycle. So we said, well, that's an impossibility. So that can't be true. And then we said the third, so we gave the water example going backwards within the cycle. Neither the rain, nor the clouds, nor the water would exist. In the same way, the Big Bang would not exist until you had a Big Crunch, but that would not exist until you had a Big Bang. So when you go backwards in the cycle, nothing exists until something initiates it. And then the third type of possibility was to say that could something come from nothing? And we say, well, this is logically absurd. This is appealing to pure magic. This is something that even atheists themselves who oppose this theory don't even mean absolute nothing. They refer to some kind of nothing as well. So if we've just discounted these three possibilities, there's only one possibility left. So if we go to the next slide, and I'm going to leave it at this final slide so we can open up into more questions and comments from the audience and from the people listening. We go to the final one. So the final conclusion would be, if the brother's there, I think the brother might not be there. Oh, he's there. He's awake. Alhamdulillah. So the final conclusion is this, is that there must be an unlimited independent creator who explains the existence for limited dependent things, contingent possible beings, things that didn't have to exist or could have existed in a different way or began to exist. They require an explanation, and that explanation is not self-contained with other limited dependent things. Requires, therefore, what we term as wajib al-wujud, or in English we'd say a necessary being. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he mentions this in the Quran where he says, Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Declare or say that Allah, he is one. Allahu samad, that he is independent, self-sufficient. But the word samad, as-samad, doesn't just mean self-sufficient. It also means upon whom everything else depends. So what do you say? We concluded from reality that everything is limited, finite, and dependent, and that ultimately you need to have an unlimited, independent creator who created, whom created the dependent, limited things that we see around us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says this, Lam yalid wa lam yulad, neither he begets nor is he begotten, doesn't begin nor end, and there is none or nothing comparable unto Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So inshallah, I'm going to leave it there so we can open it up for more questions and make it a bit more interactive, inshallah. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Jazakallah. That was again a very interesting talk. I found this one really interesting. A few new concepts. Really talking about logic and how it's used in arguments. So I'm sure everyone found it beneficial as well. We can have question and answer now. Right. So if anyone's got any questions, please put them in a chat box.
I think we had one from like quite near the start. So it's I think it was regarding actually last lesson. So it was regarding the idea of empiricism / science to come to a philosophical decision about certain things in life. Do you know of any studies or research that has been done about your point that all human beings have an innate desire to worship?
I think I quoted a few from last week. There's one from Oxford University from 2012. There's one Professor Justin Barrett. So if you, I can find the particular reference. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but there's various researches that were done. One of them was from the anthropological department of Oxford University. And maybe afterwards we can share the actual reference.
Yeah. Right. So a second question. Jazakallah for the answer as well. Why do physically limited things have to begin to exist?
Okay, so there's two things that we can say about this. The first thing that we can say is even if I say that physical things did not begin to exist, it does not matter to the argument. When sometimes I went through the argument relatively quickly, and sometimes when you look at this topic area, there's so many things that you want to say, and I just try to keep it as bare minimum as possible. But let me just focus on this particular point. Even if I turn around and I come across a red triangle, as an example, And I think that the red triangle always existed. Now, does the fact that it's red, is that explained by the fact that it's a triangle? No, it's not. And that's the point. Because the explanation is not contained in itself, then I need somebody to explain why it's the particular way it is. Yeah. So therefore, I need something that determines why it's red as opposed to any other possible color. Now, why is that important? Because our whole basis of scientific thinking, our whole basis of rational thought is built upon explaining things or looking for reasons behind things that don't have to exist the way that they do. Yeah. So, for example, if you see a ball being thrown, let's say you're not even seeing the person throwing the ball, or let's say here's another example. I came across one atheist and he was giving this example. He said, somebody's gets a rock hit on the head and they look around, and the first thought that comes to our mind, which is a rational thought, is to say, what caused it? Why do we ask that question? What causes something is because we know it's not a necessary thing. It doesn't have to have been the case that I get hit back of my head with a rock. Now, this atheist, what he tried to do is say, well, people didn't know the reasons behind things, so therefore they inserted God of the gaps. Yeah. And we're not saying that. We're not saying we're going to insert God of the gaps because we say, oh, we don't know why the rock hit me on the head. No, we're saying, no, there's two explanations as to why the rock hit me on the head. One explanation is that it is another contingent possible reality, because we said the rock hitting me on the back of the head is it's a possibility. It's a possible reality. Yeah. So either that possible reality is explained by another possible reality, but if it's another possible reality, then what do I have to do? I have to explain why that possible reality also exists. And then I'm still going to ask the same question. Is the explanation of that possible reality explained by a possible reality or by a necessary reality, something that has to exist, that's independent, that doesn't require an explanation outside of itself? Yeah. And that's why I said, is that when we look at this infinite regress argument, what we're saying is that can a possible reality explain another possible reality, explain another possible reality ad infinitum, yeah, going back forever? And we say, no, it can't. So you need a necessary foundation, something that exists by necessity in order to explain the existence of all possible realities. So going back to that red triangle example, even though I don't know if it began to exist or not, the fact that it's red as opposed to blue or green or gray or whatever other color, yeah, the fact that it has that particular possibility, the fact that it has a particular size, because it could have been any size, then it requires an explanation outside of itself. And so that explanation that we look for outside of itself is going to be an explanation that determines that it's dependent. Yeah, so it has a dependency. So that's why we're asking the question, what's it dependent upon? What gives it the particular size and the particular color? Yeah, what gives the attributes of the universe the particular size and the particular physical laws? Because they don't have to be in the way that they are. Yeah, so that's the first thing. The second thing, which is a little bit more complicated, but there's a few ways of looking at this. But it's about how we understand time. What is time? Yeah. So if we say, if we want to know what the definition of time is, or as a very basic example, if I wanted to know what time it is now, then I'm going to look at different things, aren't I? I might look out at the sky and see that it's dark outside. Yeah. So I'll go, oh, the time is nighttime. Yeah. And then maybe tomorrow morning I'll look outside and it's light, and I'll say, oh, it's now morning time, or it's daytime. Yeah. What have I done in order to determine the time here? I've looked at change. Yeah. So there's been a change of event. The change of event here is obviously the sun. Similarly, if I wanted to look at, let's say I had a clock and I wanted to look at what time it was, I look at the clock and I see, oh, right, it's this, I don't know what time it is. It's almost 8 o'clock. So, I'm looking at that. It's, then I look again and it's 8:05 or whatever. So when we look at time, or when we understand time, we say time is a measurement of change. Yeah. Things that change, that's how we determine time. If nothing changed, then we can't determine time. So if If the sun is always out in the sky and I cannot determine between nighttime and daytime, then I cannot determine whether, time. Now, obviously, some people might be clever and might say, yeah, but in the wintertime or in the summertime in the North Pole, it is perpetually dark or perpetually light. But we use other factors to determine time then. We may look at, our clocks, which are changing, or, we might look at atomic clocks, so the decay of atoms, yeah? Or we might look at pulsars in the universe, which are rotating stars, yeah? So we look at change. That's how we understand time, through change. Now, if people say something's eternal, then what they're saying is one of two things. They're saying either the thing does not change, yeah? It remains static. Or they're saying that the number of changes are an infinite number, yeah? And it falls into an infinite regress problem again. This chain of events, this change, that change, etc., depends upon this. It's an infinite regress of events. If we can prove that an infinite regress of events is impossible, then we can prove that change had to have a beginning to it. And similarly, if something doesn't change, by default, it will always remain in a changeless state. So it's not changing, it will always remain changeless. So I remember coming across one atheist, and he tried to say that the universe arose from a timeless state. Yeah, he said it arose from a timeless state. So I said, well, what is time? I explained to him that time is a measurement of change. And I said, therefore, you're saying that the universe arose from a prior period of what occurred before the universe that was unchanging. I said, well, what caused it to change then? Because obviously it's unchanging, but then it became the universe. So it's a change. So if it's unchanging, timeless, then it's remaining in that state. Something had to have occurred in order for it to change from being a timeless state to what we live in today, which is a temporal state of change, where there's now a universe that we live in. So if we can demonstrate that anything that resides in time resides within change. If anything resides within change, there cannot be an infinite number of changes. There must be a beginning to change, or to change of limited things. Therefore, anything that we see around us will all have a beginning within time. Yeah. If that's not clear, I will explain it in an easier way or another way.
Yeah, I think we've
So I've really gone over that. Just to summarize, because I went over quite a lot of points. The first point was, I don't need to identify something began to exist. All I need to do is identify that it's not necessary for it to be the way it is. Because if it's not necessary for it to be the way it is, then I know that it needs an explanation outside of itself. Yeah. The second way is obviously talking about time being the measurement of change, or measurement of movement of objects is another way of defining time. And therefore, anything that exists within change must have a beginning. Otherwise, you fall into an infinite regress.
If anyone's got any more questions, please put them in now, or else we can wrap up.
We've got a couple more questions. There
should be loads of questions.
Yeah, there are. So we have, the next question we have is, what can we as Muslims say against the God of the Gaps argument? It might be worthwhile to explain the God of the Gaps argument.
Yeah, so the God of the Gaps argument is basically what atheists claim that theists do, people who believe in God do, which is basically say, well, we can't explain something, therefore God must do it. Yeah, but we're not saying that. We're not saying that at all. We're saying that for things to exist that are limited and therefore dependent, they either depend upon another limited thing, or they depend upon an unlimited independent thing. Now, if we cannot define, we cannot logically affirm that limited things can depend upon other limited things in an infinite regress or an infinite cycle, eternal cycle, then by definition, limited things, because we see limited things exist, then by definition, there must be a necessary thing, an unlimited independent thing that must exist. And that unlimited independent thing that must exist is what we would term the creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So we're not using God of the gaps, because let's say they discover something in the future. Let's say they discover, you know, a universe before this universe. Well, I'm still going to ask the question, is it a necessary thing, or is it a possible thing? Is it unlimited, or is it limited? If it's limited, then it's going to have an explanation as to who limited, or how it's limited, or why it's limited in the way it is, or what is it dependent upon. And therefore, I would still fall into this question of what caused it, or what's the explanation behind it. Yeah. So it doesn't explain anything unless they will appeal to something coming from nothing. Yeah. And then they have problems regards to that. Because if they really believe that something comes from nothing, then that means that, you know, an elephant can come behind me. Yeah. Obviously, we'd say that's ridiculous. Nobody would use that as a basis of rational thinking. In fact, that would break down the idea that the universe is comprehensible. And because we understand the universe is comprehensible, that we can understand the universe. You know, I'm sure you guys are doing various degrees, whether that's through science or biology or, you know, physics or even law or history or whatever it is. The principle of being able to study these things is that things are comprehensible. I can understand things, that they follow regularity. Yeah, that, you know, randomness is not true. It doesn't just, you know, things are not just completely random without no explanation. Because if that's the case, then I can't explain anything, because I couldn't explain whether something was just a random event that has no explanation or not. So I have to ground everything under the idea that there is an explanation or a cause behind limited finite dependent things. And that explanation of limited finite dependent things cannot be explained by other limited finite dependent things ultimately. Therefore, it must be grounded in an unlimited independent creator. Yeah. Any other questions or?
Yeah, I think that was pretty comprehensive. Got one more question. I'm not sure. You might get some follow-up questions after some of your comments. So it's I think the question is, what is the difference between a limited thing and a thing that began to exist? Because it seems like the fact that something began to exist, time, is more useful one for proving the existence of God.
To be honest, look, it's these are just different arguments, isn't it? So whatever argument works for you, that's what works for you, isn't it? Really, whatever convinces you rationally. Limited thing, it just means that things have a size, a shape, has a particular energy amount, has particular attributes, as opposed to, you know, being unlimited. So everything that we see around us has a certain size, a certain shape, a certain, you know, aspect or attribute with regards to them. Yeah. Now those limitations that exist within things, they're not explained by the thing itself. Yeah. So who does? If I could, I don't. Maybe the chair and the brothers here, they might be able to explain. Who does chemistry or physics? Do people do chemistry and physics at UCLan? Nobody. We all do history and law and psychology, maybe. Okay. So
Someone
let's say
said, "What is Euclid?"
Isn't it University of Lancashire? Or
Yeah. I think
yeah.
you've got
Okay.
a lot of so Euclid and Lancaster. I think someone.
Oh, okay. University of Central Lancashire. Yeah. So cool. So let's say, for example, yeah, somebody turns around and says to me, okay, the reason why water boils at 100 degrees Celsius as opposed to 110 degrees Celsius is because of the hydrogen bonding that exists between water molecules. Yeah. Now, has everybody heard of hydrogen bonding?
Well,
Has the chair heard of hydrogen bonding? The chairs.
Well, Mohammed, have you?
Definitely not.
Oh, okay.
But you're more likely to.
Okay, there's a few people have heard of hydrogen bonding. If you did A level biochemistry, you may have heard of hydrogen bonding. So hydrogen bonding is basically where you've got an oxygen molecule. So what's water? Is water molecule is basically H2O, one oxygen, two hydrogens. Yeah. And what happens is in hydrogen bonding is that the one molecule of water is slightly polarized. It's like a magnet, yeah? And another molecule of water is slightly polarized. So the hydrogen atom that's attached to one molecule of water, H2O, is more positive. And the oxygen atom is negative. It actually attracts the electron away from the hydrogen towards itself. Yeah, so it's more negative as a result, and so they line into this nice little lattice pattern of water. That's why, if people want to know, that's why when water freezes, it actually increases volume, and it's actually lighter as well than water, liquid water, that is, because of the hydrogen bonding. So therefore they're saying, well, because you've got this like polarity between water molecules, like this magnetic effect, you need energy in order to break the molecule of one water molecule with another water, and that energy actually happens to be 100 degrees Celsius. Yeah. So if somebody says, okay, it happens to be 100 degrees Celsius, that's being explained by hydrogen bonding. But then I would ask the question, or we would ask the question, well, why should what they term the electronegativity of the oxygen atom be higher than the electronegativity of the hydrogen atom, such that it attracts the electron to the oxygen atom to itself? Yeah. Why should it be the case? And people say, oh, the reason why is because the relative distance between the nucleus and the electron shell of the oxygen atom is less in comparison to the protons than when we look at the issue of, and the number of protons, than when we look at the issue of the hydrogen atom. Yeah. So it's to do with the electronegativity of the atoms. Yeah. So say, therefore, the this is the explanation as to why you have hydrogen bonding, why you have water flowing, and why you have 100 degrees Celsius. Then I'd ask the question, okay, so why is it that the protons within the nucleus of the atoms, why are they positive? So they'll turn around and say, oh, it's positive because you have a neutron which has less of an electron, and therefore, as a result, produces a proton particle and produces the positivity. And then I would ask, and then they'll say, oh, the reason why electron's negative is because of the spin of the particle. If it spins this way, it's called a positron. If it spins this way, it's called an electron. And that's why. So I'm going to ask the question again. Well, why does a spin of an electron result in it being negative as opposed to being positive? And then they might start talking Higgs boson field and say Higgs boson field, it does X, Y, Z, provides mass and attributes to matter, and therefore that results in why it has this particular spin, and therefore this particular negative charge as opposed to a positive charge, etc. Then I'm going to ask the next question, which is what? Why does a Higgs boson field have those attributes? Yeah. So now what are we doing? Yeah. We're trying to explain why does water boil 100 degrees Celsius, and all the questions, all the answers require another question, don't they? Yeah. So I need to explain 100 degrees Celsius by hydrogen bonding. I need to explain why hydrogen bonding by electronegativity of the atom. I need to explain the electronegativity of the atom by explaining why electrons are negative and why protons are positive. Then I need to explain why electrons are negative by Higgs boson field and proton. And then I need to explain why Higgs boson field is the way it is. I have constantly questions of why. Yeah, I know some people are thinking, oh my God, what's he going on about? All I'm saying is that every explanation here, of limited finite things requires a why question, which is never fully satisfied. There is no ultimate why question or explanation to this why question when you start pointing to another limited finite thing. You still need another question. Yeah. This is what we call a hierarchical causation series. And in a hierarchical causation series, you will fall into an infinite regress. If an infinite regress is impossible, then as a result, you need to have a necessary being, a beginning. In order to have a beginning as a foundation to explain why the attributes of the universe and the particles have the attributes that they have, then that necessary foundation must be independent. For it to be independent, it also must be unlimited. It's not defined in a particular way, must be completely free. In order to be completely free, therefore, it can't be some mechanical thing, some physical thing. It must be able to choose. And if it's able to choose, then it has agency. It means it's something that has a will. And if it has a will, then we're not just talking about a physical thing now. We're talking about a necessary being that chose the attributes within the universe and chose the attributes of the Higgs boson field to choose to be able to allow the electrons to exist, to electronegativity of the atom, for the hydrogen bonding, and for water to be able to boil at 100 degrees Celsius. It had to be a basis of choice, for this necessary being in order for the universe to exist. So hopefully that's answered that question. Does that make, if it doesn't answer the question or it doesn't quite make sense, please feel free to ask further. So anyway, so what's the difference between a limited thing and a thing that began to exist? Because it seems like the fact that something began to exist is more useful for one, for proving the existence of God. Like I said, either both ways you can use. So you can say that the universe began to exist because the universe is a sum of all events, and the sum of all events had to have a beginning. And I think that goes on to another question that somebody asked, I think, which was by Jamil Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. Could the universe have always existed? No, the universe could not have always existed, because if we say that the universe has always existed, and we're saying that for the universe to always exist, to be eternal. So just before I go on, any questions on further on what I just said before I answer this particular question? Because I know I've spoken for a bit.
It might be worth looking at Osama's comment. I think it sounds like something that's relevant.
Okay, so induction basically takes from a particular to the general, true. We know that the scientific method doesn't give absolute facts because future observations can contradict previous conclusions. However, testing the boiling point of water using the scientific method, concluding that it boils at 100 degrees Celsius, it would sound irrational to say that water would not boil at 100 degrees Celsius. Next time I boil water, it would not boil at 100 degrees Celsius. Is there a difference between the conclusion using scientific method and using science to understand the theory of gravity, for example? Okay, so this may be more in relation to what I said a little bit. So there is nothing necessary to say that water, by its definition, should boil at 100 degrees Celsius. There's nothing necessary. That's why we had to experience it. I don't have to experience that a triangle has 3 sides, or that if somebody turns around and says that a bachelor is unmarried, by its very definition, a bachelor must be unmarried, If somebody turns around to me and says, can you have a squared circle? I don't need to do an experiment in order to observe that, because I know by its very definition, you cannot have a square that's also a circle, So it's an illogical proposition, it's irrational. There's nothing logical to say that the definition of water would have to boil at 100 degrees Celsius at room conditions, 1 atmosphere, etc. There's nothing necessary for that. It's not within the definition of water. That's why I have to experience it, And if I have to experience it, it means it's because it's not contained in its own definition that it has to boil at 100 degrees Celsius. And I said, even if we want to talk about hydrogen bonding, and even if you want to go and talk about electronegativity, if we want to go to that level, none of those questions or none of those answers results in a foundation to give me a fundamental explanation as to why it boils at 100 degrees Celsius. All those answers have another question to why those things exist in the first place, and why do those things have an attribute that's specific to itself when it could have been another way. So I still need to keep going down and drilling the question down. Now I can go on forever, and that's an infinite regress, and that's impossibility. Or I reach a necessary foundation, and that necessary foundation is a necessary unlimited independent being that chose to create, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So maybe it's a hard thing to sort of grasp our minds around, but things that we experience don't have to be the way that they are. Yeah. Maybe another example of this, which is an example that an empiricist he gave in the 18th century. He talked about billiard balls, but I'll give you the example of pool table. So imagine you had a pool table and you hit the white ball towards the black ball, and you've never seen this occur before. Yeah. And you think, well, you're trying to predict what's going to happen. What would you expect to happen as the white ball moves towards the black ball? Now, naturally, we're going to say, oh, the black ball is going to move. But if we've never experienced this situation before, what would we be able to say? Well, we don't know, isn't it? It could be the case that the black ball shatters, the white ball could shatter, the white ball could bounce off the black ball and the black ball stays completely stationary, or the black ball could move. These are all possible events. They're not explained by the very definition of a white ball, cue ball, and a black pool ball. Yeah, it doesn't explain what's going to happen just by knowing its definition. So as a result, I have to experience it. Now, if I did it the second time around, this is what David Hume was saying, this empiricist. He said, if I did it the second time around and I did the same thing, I hit the white ball to go towards the black ball. I've seen the first time around the black ball move. The second time I do it, what would I expect? Now, we would say the black ball to move. He said, that's an assumption. Yeah. The assumption here is that future observations are predicated upon previous or future events are predicated upon past observations. I think that's mentioned in the comment there as well. Yeah. We don't expect it, basically. Yeah. We don't expect that this would, so we would expect it. We assume that future observations will follow past experiences. If I saw the black ball move, then I'm going to expect it to occur in the future. David Hume said that's an assumption. Again, he said there's nothing necessary for that to occur. We assume it. Yeah. And therefore, because it's assumed, and therefore it's not necessary for one thing to occur over another thing, then we need an explanation, and the explanation is not contained within the thing itself, it's outside of itself. I don't know if, hopefully that's explained. If it's not explained and you want to come back and criticize it or ask more, even if the brothers are okay, if somebody wants to come back and speak as well over the mic, that'll be fine with me as well. It's a problem of causation in empiricism and science, that empiricism cannot prove causation. All we can prove is correlation. So we can prove that event A occurs, and then after event A, event B occurs. But you can't prove that event A caused event B. This is a problem of causation under an empirical perspective. Now, we know that causation must occur because otherwise we couldn't make sense of the world. Yeah. So if causation must be an axiom of rational thinking and also a presupposition within science, because science wouldn't work if we didn't have causation. Yeah. The whole purpose of science is to assume that causality must be true so that we can make predictions for future events based upon past experiences. Then if causation cannot be explained by the material thing, then because it's not definitional, yeah, like unmarried bachelors is definitional, yeah. By definition, or three-sided triangle is definitional. We know it by its definition. If it's not known by its definition, but it occurs, and therefore that explanation is not explained by itself. Yeah, it's not explained by the material thing. It means it requires something extra material, yeah, or a non-natural explanation in order to explain why the universe should operate according to causal relationships. That's going into a bit more detail and a bit more deeper.
No, Jazakallah. I think also, yeah, like Ustad mentioned, if you want to use your mic, feel free to do so. It's good to hear voices. But
Someone's got his hand up.
Yeah, sure. Someone, you can go ahead if you want to speak.
Assalamu alaikum. My point is basically an add-on onto the question. Basically, I'm a bit confused in the sense that if, for example, if I had a ball and I dropped that ball, I know that ball falls onto the ground. Next time, I mean, for me, I'm 100% going to be sure that if I drop a ball, it's going to fall onto the ground. I mean, that can be seen as a scientific experiment. However, I mean, what's the difference between scientific experiment or scientific method in this case and rational thinking?
Okay,
Because,
so yeah, so
yeah.
just, if you stay online, so I can speak to you as well, Summer.
Yeah.
So when you say you're 100% certain, why are you 100% certain that as you drop the ball, it's going to fall to the ground?
Because it's rational, I think. I mean,
it's rational to a certain extent. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
It's rational to a certain extent, but it is still inductive, isn't it?
Yeah,
Still based upon two experiences of dropping a ball and seeing that it falls to the ground. And the third time you do it, you will expect it to fall to the ground. But we can't say it's 100% though, can we?
I mean, I understand your point, to be honest. But okay, so what's the difference now between the scientific method and rational thinking? Because as you mentioned in the presentation earlier, that rational thinking uses previous experiences.
Yeah. So
yes.
let's take this example then. So it's a really good point that you mentioned and the question as well. So when we say, okay, I dropped the ball, I'm going to expect it to fall to the ground. For me to say I'm going to expect it, it's not just because of my experience. It's because of my belief that causality is something that exists within the universe. Yeah. Now, causality cannot be explained by the universe. The universe doesn't have to follow any causal relationships whatsoever. Causality doesn't have to exist. Yeah. Materialism doesn't have to explain causality. Yeah. So if I'm expecting causality, I drop a ball under the force of gravity, it falls to the ground. That's causality. That's a causal relationship between the ball and the ground. Then if it's not explained by materialism, then it has to be explained by something. Something must have enacted the universe to operate the way it operates. Yeah, the laws that it operates upon. If it's not the thing itself that's explaining why it should operate the way it is, then the way it's operating must be explained by something other than the thing itself. Yeah, it's like the wooden chair example. The fact that it's wood does not tell me that it's going to be a chair. It could have been any other thing. It could have been a table. Yeah. So the universe did not have to operate according to causal relationships. The theory of gravity or the law of gravity didn't have to operate the way it does. It could have operated in another way. It's not explained by itself. Yeah. So if it's not explained by itself, it has to be explained outside of itself. Yeah. If matter cannot explain, if the universe cannot explain the existence of gravity or causality, the principle of causality, then the principle of causality must be explained outside of the universe. Yeah. Outside of matter. Yeah. A supernatural or non-naturalistic agent, a non-contingent being, a necessary being, a creator. Yeah. Does that make sense, Osama?
Yeah. It does. So causality, first, we believe in it. As in, we believe in it because we're Muslims, and we believe that there's an external necessary being that enforced causality to exist.
Yeah, but even if you're an atheist, you would come to the same conclusion, because this is what David Hume was an atheist. He said there's nothing. He said there's nothing that is causally necessary for A to cause B within the universe. There's nothing causally necessary between the two. Doesn't have to be. But he goes, but we just operate as though it does. We just assume it does. That's how we just get on with our life, yeah? Okay, if there's a big thing though. If you can't explain why A causes B within the universe, there's nothing necessary for it. It could be the case that it didn't have to have that effect. Then it needs an explanation outside of itself. Yeah. So that means you're coming into the create. So this is different, and this is where the empiricism and rationality separates, because the reason why David Hume remained an atheist, even knowing this fact, was because he was an empiricist. He only believed that science and what you experience is what you can have some knowledge on. Anything which you can't see or directly sense, then you can't have knowledge upon. And as a result of that, he comes to these absurd conclusions that causality doesn't exist and it cannot be proven, and we just have to get on with our life. Why do I eat if I don't believe that the food is going to cause me to nourish myself? Yeah, he just said, well, just assume it anyway. Yeah, because he was an empiricist. But as somebody who's rational, who says, actually, you can come to conclusions based upon what we term the logical entailment of our observations of the reality, then the logical entailment is not to deny causality as an absolute, but to say that causality, if it exists, cannot be explained by materialism. And if it cannot be explained by materialism, then therefore it has to be explained by the creator. Yeah, that's a logical argument, a rational argument. That's an argument that many of the Muslim scholars of the past also used. It's also contained within, some people talk about it in the context of a contingency argument. It's an argument from contingency as well.
Okay, I've got another point that is related to that. So I mean, so what's the difference between using science to test certain things, for example, the boiling point of water or a boiling point of a certain liquid, and using science to understand the theory of gravity? Because theory of gravity could change in the future. I mean, even as Muslims, we know that the theory of gravity could change. However, the boiling point of water, as Muslims, we know that it will never change unless there's a miracle.
No, but no, agreed. Yeah, so this is the point here. Is this, which is a really interesting point. If the things that we see around us cannot explain themselves, why they exist the way that they do, then quite literally everything is a mu'jiza, a miracle. Yeah. So everything is literally a sign for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. If everything that exists in a particular way, as opposed to another way, and it cannot explain its own existence, it has to have something external to itself to explain its existence, then everything that exists is a sign and miracle for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah. So so that's why we can say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can interfere as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wishes. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran that the universe operates according to a system. Yeah. So we see that the universe operates according to a system, and the grounding for that as Muslims is what's mentioned in the Quran by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Hence we investigate how this system works. How did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala create the normative system within the universe? Now, where does miracles come in? Because boiling point water doesn't have to always boil at 100 degrees Celsius. It's an inductive process, yeah? Just like the theory of gravity is inductive as well, yeah? Even though theory of gravity is well established. But it's a system because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He created the universe with a system, that there are cause and effects within the universes, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls both the cause and the effect, but He created a system of the universe like this, and we can investigate it and operate according to this universe. So where does miracles come in? Because isn't miracles a violation of natural law? Well, and you're saying basically there is no natural law, because nature doesn't explain its own laws. It's Allah explains the laws. But the point here is when we identify a miracle, in Arabic, mu'jiza, what we're identifying is a non-naturalistic explanation. It's an explanation that cannot be explained, through nature, or secondly, it's a beyond human capability, So it's beyond human capability. So we can identify something is beyond human capability, even though we are controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our capability is controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have been given a certain sphere by which we can operate. If a sign comes to us and no other human being can replicate it, then by definition it's beyond human productive capacity or human capability. It requires an explanation outside of itself, and that explanation is a point, a sign, an indicator that it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the Quran and mu'jiza, like Isa alayhi salam raising the people from the dead, or like by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Musa alayhi salam, singing into the snake, beyond human productive capacity. Therefore, it's a clear indication that this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But everything within the universe is also a clear indication that it's a sign from that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. Yeah, I hope that makes sense and is clear.
Exactly.
So the problem is I can't even see. I can't see people's facial expressions, so it's difficult to see whether they're looking at me and thinking, "I don't know what you're saying," but yeah, I agree. Sorry, was there any other questions or?
I don't think so, unless I've missed something. Mohammed, have you seen any questions?
Yeah. There's one here. Can the existence of God only be proven with empiricism and rationalism in hand? What about the idea of mysticism?
Yeah, so look, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, that it's innate, it's something that is natural as part of our human condition, that we believe that there is a creator. I mentioned this last week as well, a few studies that were done on this. Also, when we look at the example of the painting, and I said the painting is a possible being that has multiple forms that then the physical form doesn't explain. In philosophy, they would say the material cause is not sufficient explanation for its particular form. Therefore, it requires a efficient cause, an agent, in order to determine it to have a particular form of the material cause. Now, that sounds really complicated, yeah. But innately, rationally, in a very simple, clear way, we would come to the conclusion there is a painter. I don't need to go through a philosophical argument for this. In the same way, innately, rationally, it is very clear that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists. It's just a very fundamental, basic aspect of the universe. The problem is that we have to go into a bit more detail now, because people try to confuse the argument. Or some people try to confuse the argument by saying, but the universe could have been in an infinite cycle. Okay, well, let's talk about an infinite cycle. Or, the universe, could have an infinite chain of events. Or let's look at an infinite chain of events. Is that possible? Is an infinite regress possible? Or why do we have to ask a question of what causes something? Why can't it just be, well, that's why we're talking about a contingent being, things that don't have to exist the way that they do. And the fact that they exist, but its explanation for its existence is not contained within itself, requires something else to explain its existence. Yeah? That's rational. That's how we operate within the universe. And you just have to explain it, maybe make it more explicit, and therefore go into the subject matter a little bit more detailed regards to this. So this is what we mean by, yes, naturally, innately, we can come to this conclusion. We have this innate desire to want to worship. People talk about personal experiences. The problem with the arguments of personal experiences is that I come across a lot of non-Muslim Christians or, other Hindus or whoever it is. They will also refer to personal experience and mysticism. And you need to demarcate whether the person's hallucinating, whether it's shaitan deceiving them, or whether it's a true experience. And the only way to demarcate that is through a rational process. And so that's why we use a rational process in order to determine that. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, calls upon people who think, calls upon people who use their mind, and so this is in many ayat of Quran that refutes polytheists of their time by rational arguments. For example, one argument that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala poses to the Quraysh, who used to bury their daughters alive and who used to feel great shame having daughters. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, it says, you affirm daughters to Allah, but yet when you have daughters, your face goes dark and gloomy. You feel humiliated. I.e., Allah, you recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is greater than you, is the greatest being, but yet you apply a standard that you yourself don't adhere to. It's a rational argument showing the absurdity and the inconsistency of their position. So many verses of Quran like this. For example, very quickly, the other verse, Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he was in the court of Nimrod, and he said to the Ibrahim alayhi salam said to Nimrod, he says, Allah causes life and causes death. And then Nimrod said, oh, I do this. I have this power. And he executes a free person, and he lets a person who's going to be executed freed. And then Ibrahim said, oh, my Lord raises the sun from the east, you raise it from the west. Yeah. And he was completely stumped. He didn't know how to argue that. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives these stories and examples in order to show how, you use your mind in order to come to certain objective conclusions in regards to this. So I'm not trying to deny people's personal experiences, especially if it's grounded within Islam. But I would not say that that is the fundamental basis by which you should ground your particular belief. Any other questions or comments?
Might be a bit of a follow-up from that, inshallah.
Go on.
I guess from inside the tradition of Islam in and of itself, just looking at the topic in and of itself, so the proof, philosophy, kalam, and things like that. You mentioned Imam Ghazali at the start as well. He was going through some irrational proofs, and obviously he had certain opinions on where these kind of arguments fit into Islam. Where do you think in today's day and age that has its place? Because there are many scholars on both sides who will be, maybe against using kalam arguments to prove the existence of God or to prove Islam and things like that.
Yeah, I find it strange. I don't think any very few scholars. Very few scholars criticize the rational arguments for the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What they criticized was, and the same thing with Imam Ghazali, was they criticized the extent of the rational mind to understand things outside of the universe, or of the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, So, I give this example many times. I say, look, if somebody knocks on the door, you're going to naturally know somebody's behind the door. But you're not going to know if it's a man or a woman, what color hair they've got, what color eyes they've got. None of these things are known because you can only ascertain the existence of the person behind the door. You don't know the essence of the person behind the door. In the same way, we can comprehend or we can apprehend the existence of the creator, but we cannot comprehend Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. We can't comprehend existence. So we can understand certain things. We can come to the conclusion that there is a one being. Why one being? Because obviously if there's multiple necessary beings, they limit each other. And if they limit each other, then they're no longer necessary, or unlimited, they're limited. If they're limited, they become dependent, etc. So, you have to have one. So you can come to that conclusion. You can come to the conclusion that they're independent, they're self-sufficient, they don't require another cause for its existence. The creator doesn't require another cause for its existence. It's independent. You can come to these conclusions that the creator created. By definition, everything else depends upon the creator, but the creator depends upon nothing. So therefore, the creator created. The creator created with choice, because, or if you've got a number of possibilities and you pick one, that indicates choice. So the universe could have had different attributes of the way it does. Water could have boiled at different attributes, electronegativity, etc. Could have been all different. But the fact that it has that as opposed to other attributes indicates choice. So you have will. So you can come to these conclusions, but beyond that, that's it. And that's where we submit to what the Quran says. Now, what some of the philosophers did in the past, like Ibn Sina, Ibn Rushd, and a few others, is they took this rational discussion and they went and started to understand the essence of the creator with it. And, and this is why they were, some of them were, excommunicated from the faith or considered deviant and things like that, because they started to adopt too many commitments about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's nature, which weren't rational. So it's rational to know there are limits to your rationality. And to go outside of that would be irrational. And that's what happened, is that they went outside of their ability to make irrational conclusions about matters of the unseen, and they started to limit it and determine. So some of them, they denied bodily resurrection. They looked at revelation as though it was a metaphor type of thing, an allegory for people who weren't philosophically savvy, that type of thing. So obviously they went far away because they let their mind run in incorrect directions. It has to remain firmly fixed within what is rational and what it's limited to. And just on that basis, you can conclude that there is a creator and that atheism is false.
SubhanAllah, Jazakallah, that's a really good answer. Any other questions from anyone else?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Go ahead.
Just to think a follow-up question from earlier, or just to clarify a point. Uh, when does a person use rational thinking in his day-to-day life? I mean, other than understanding the existence of a creator, rather
So
than using scientific thinking.
So we're not saying scientific thinking is not rational thinking. Yeah, it's part of rational thinking. The difference is that we don't limit scientific thinking as the only form of rational thinking or only form of thinking. That results in a self-contradiction. It's a problem with regards to this. If people start to limit, say the only truth is what's found within science, because then you start denying things that exist, because science hasn't proven it. Yeah? So science can't prove at this moment in time that other human beings are conscious. Yeah, what it means to be conscious. That science can't prove that. Now, we discussed that last week, but you can't do it. Now, and somebody might say, yeah, but you can get brain waves now. You can go put, electrodes into people's brain. You can sense their brain waves, the action potentials, etc. So we know this, yeah. But hold on, does that mean before you attach people, measure their brain waves, that you don't know whether they're conscious or not? Nobody's going to say that. So that's the point, is that, yeah, science is part of rational thinking, but rational thinking is a broader aspect, and science fits within that, and science has limitations, further limitations. One of those limitations is inductive nature, the fact that you go from particular observations and you generalize, and you have to assume causality, but you can't prove causality. You have to assume that there are patterns within the universe. You can't not assume that, yeah? So, you have to test and experiment, in order to understand the existence of contingent beings, because contingent limited things do not explain why they exist the way that they exist. That's why you have to experience it, yeah? So it's part of a wider, broader rational process. So hopefully that's answered that question. And so you said, where do we use it? Well, like I said, we can use it in science. We can use it in understanding that other minds exist. We can use it to explain that reality exists. We can use it to come to the conclusion that the Quran is the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can use it to come to the conclusion that there would be a need for messengers. We can come to the conclusion that it's rational to follow what the Quran says. It's irrational to use our mind to try to change the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That would be irrational. We use the rationality when we make even general decisions, like, for example, the whole debate over whether people should take the vaccine or not. We need to be rational in that process as well. So there's many aspects in terms of how we approach our lives in a rational way. Just like I said, on the most fundamental thing is that we accept rationally that other human beings have a mind and that they have self-awareness, like we have self-awareness.
Jazakallah. I've got a personal question, and I don't think anyone's got any more questions. But kind of all these cosmological arguments, how can you put them into how would you put this knowledge into everyday practice?
So the cosmology, how would you put the cosmology? I think the point here is this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran. He talks about thinking deeply, isn't it? Yeah, having that conviction in your faith. فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ, and have knowledge with certainty that there is none worthy of worship except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is the point, isn't it? Is that, as Muslims, we're meant to be deep, enlightened thinkers. This is how, this is what the Quran teaches. It builds us to become these deep, enlightened people, these intellectuals, as best as we possibly can. This is why we look at the early period of Islam amongst the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the Tabi'een and the other generations. You found that they innovated in so many different things, so many different sciences. We think, we think sometimes that all, back in the day, people were unsophisticated, but they developed a system to verify history through the Isnad system, through Ulum al-Hadith, isn't it? They developed grammatical rules of the Arabic language. They codified the whole of the Arabic language. Yeah. This is like, next level stuff, yeah? To codify a whole language, to develop dictionaries and lexicons and explain the etymology of the words. This is done by even amongst the Sahaba themselves. They even developed the script, the rasm, yeah, of the Arabic language. We know, isn't it, the Arabic language, we say alif, ba, ta, tha, yeah. They didn't have that, but they did. The order of alif, ba, ta, tha wasn't that order. It was a different order, or different tribes had different orders. But they did that. They standardized that based upon the point of articulation in the mouth. Yeah. And then there was the science of tajweed and the science of tafsir and ilm al-balagha, the science of rhetoric and understanding language. And then from that came, obviously we mentioned about history and historical analysis, and then jurisprudence. Yeah. All of that is because people were deep and enlightened in their thinking, and part of that process is because of the way Islam commands people to believe in Islam based upon a thinking process. Yeah. So I'm not saying go away, learn a few arguments as like a tick box and then debate some atheists. I'm saying use this because you need to internalize what it means to be deep and enlightened and rational, as what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is calling us to do, to use that mind because we are honored because we have that mind. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says He honored the children of Adam, part of the uniqueness of that is because our ability to make rational capacity. The part of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that, He told the angels that He was going to create Adam alayhi salam, or human beings upon the earth, and He taught them the names of things, Adam alayhi salam, the names of things, and then Adam alayhi salam was able to then expand the names in order to then derive new names. Yeah, so through a rational process, it's through intellectual ideas. And we need to start to cultivate that as best as possible for ourselves. Forget about any debates or this. I'm not saying go into debates and discuss. Inshallah, if you get the opportunity to do dawah, isn't it? Engage with non-Muslims and Muslims alike, etc., to explain the truthfulness of Islam. Definitely do that. But, understand that the Quran, just like amongst the early generation, first generation of Sahaba, created intellectual giants. Yeah, they weren't like just people who followed. They were able to innovate in new sciences that have, weren't known to the Arabs at that time, weren't even known to humanity. Isnad system is not something that was used by any other, the way the Muslims developed it was never used by any other generation of civilization. It's unique to the Muslim civilization. And then obviously the manifestation of that, or the ramification of this process of, using the mind, is that obviously Muslims started to develop science, technology, and mathematics, and start to name the stars and navigation, etc. But that's because of the way they developed that. So for me, part of the way I look at the issue of the Muslims today is that we've sort of learnt our deen more through rote learning, memorize certain words, repeat those words back, and you're a Muslim now, alhamdulillah. And yeah, you are a Muslim, alhamdulillah, but it is important to go back to how Islam first developed the first personality. The Quran developed the first personalities and found the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he developed deep intellectual people, and they were developing these, discussions and arguments and explanations on these issues. So, and that's part of the revival of the Muslims, to go back and to understand these things, to go back and explain how to develop Islam from first principles, not develop something, how to prove Islam from first principles is an important aspect of developing ourselves. This is only one discussion. Yeah, I prove of existence of subhanAllah. Don't just stay here as well. Sometimes brothers constantly talk about this topic all the time, and it's an important topic, no doubt. But once you've developed this discussion, then move on. Start learning about proof for messengership, Prophet ﷺ. Start to understand the message of the Quran, the message of the Sunnah. Start to understand jurisprudence and Rasul and Ulum, the different sciences. This is where it all stems from, isn't it, inshallah?
Jazakallah. Yeah, may Allah ask Allah to give us hidayah and sincerity and keep us humble, and humility as well. And may Allah bless you and reward you, Ustad, for giving your
Jazakallah.
all those detailed answers. We absolutely loved it. It was
Well, you
very
have Hamza next week, haven't you? Hamza sorts this.
inshallah.
Superstar, alhamdulillah. MashaAllah. So that'll be very exciting.
Inshallah, yeah. So Jazakallah so much for taking time out.
Wa yakum, Jazakallah khair.
Have you got any sort of concluding remarks? Anything that you'd like to plug? Social media? Where can we find out more about you?
Well, at the moment, I'm doing a podcast with some brothers. Maybe some of the brothers might not have heard of a couple of these people. One brother is called Yusuf Ponders, also known as Pondering Soul. He's a
Yes.
convert to Islam. So I'm doing a podcast with himself. Another brother called Jake, who's also a convert to Islam. Also, he's got a YouTube channel called Muslim Metaphysician. He debates a lot of very high-level Christian academics, on the issue of the Trinity and things like that. So the actual podcast is called the Thought Adventure Podcast, TAP. Yeah. So go on that, inshallah, if you can do. We did a first live session last week. Yeah, I think it was last week. Check that out. Subscribe to it. We're going to consistently do videos. We're going to invite non-Muslims on. Muslims can also join in live call-ins, discussions, debates on that channel, and trying to make it fruitful, inshallah.
Any sort of upcoming debates? We did hear that you were going to debate an archaeologist.
Yeah, I was going to debate an ex-Muslim, but I think what happened was that he pulled back. I think it was. I don't think he wanted to debate anyway. He's not. When he was very young. When he maybe about 17, 18, maybe younger. He converted to Islam. He came from a white sort of American background. He didn't really was around Muslims. He then sort of left Islam. I don't think he was very knowledgeable about Islam. He's a nice guy. His name's Josh. He's a nice guy, but he doesn't really know much. Last time I talked to him, I had a discussion with him about proof of the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He did admit that the arguments made sense. And if you watch the Thought Adventure podcast, the one that we did, there's a nice discussion we had with Justin. We talked about, and Justin is another atheist who's on the same show as this guy called Josh, this archaeologist, and you can see how these guys respond to the argument. Yeah, we didn't go into much detail because he already knows the argument. We already discussed with him, but you have a look at how he responds and what he says about Islam and what he says about Muslims and what he says about thinking about converting to Islam. So I don't think that's going to take place because I don't think he really wants to discuss this issue.
Jazakallah khair, inshallah. Once again, we do appreciate all the time that you've given us, and we've been able to put something together. Inshallah, it's been really nice. I think you plugged it already to next time. Obviously, we've gone through Rising Tide of Atheism, and we've tried to prove why God exists. And the next we'll be asking the question, why Islam? Because there are many religions out there. Inshallah. And that's by Hamza. Inshallah, big name, of course, but inshallah, Allah grant us all reward. I mean, we can close it up here. We can wrap it up here. I think it's been a solid 2 hours. Alhamdulillah. All the recordings, just for your information, have been put on YouTube. We can send you the links and stuff like that as well. They're all unlisted for now.
Yeah, no, that's fine, inshallah.
Okay. Yeah,
Jazakallah.
Right then, Jazakallah khair. Hopefully we'll see you next week for the Hamza talk, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, guys.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Guys.